What's up YouTube, and welcome back to Homebrew Subaru. In this episode I am going to start modifying the fuel system. So what's up everyone? Like I kind of ended last week, I wasn't really sure where I was going next. I'm still kind of waiting on some exhaust. The wiring's a pain in the ass, so I decided I'll go on to the fuel system next. So in order to do this, there's a few things I need to do and a few things I need to change, and I'll kind of explain how the fuel system works after I'm kind of at the end of it. But first things first. So some of the parts I need to install: a new fuel filter, obviously. I really don't know what the mileage is on the one that's on the car now. I was running a dual fuel filter setup, but I've decided to go back to the single filter. I never ran into an issue with dual filters, and this was just something I came up with myself because of the high pressure feed. And from what I remember, the factory filters can start to come apart with that amount of high pressure fuel going through there. But I've never had a problem, so I decided, well, I'll go back to a regular filter or just a single filter. And if I have an issue, then I've got a second filter that I can change out with, just in case I have an issue. And then if I need to go back to two filters, I will, but I don't think that's going to happen. This is a FMU, or fuel measuring unit. This bumps fuel pressure per PSI of boost. So this is a 10-to-1 ratio. So for every pound of boost that this receives, it will raise fuel pressure 10 psi. So at 5 psi, it's adding an additional 50 psi on top of base pressure. So we're talking maybe around 95 psi. But like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end when I have everything installed. And next is just a 320 liter per hour fuel pump and some new stuff to put on. So I have to dig out the fuel pump assembly to change that out, and we'll leave that for last. I'm going to start by changing out the fuel filter and kind of figuring out where this FMU is going to mount. I repainted the bracket. It was green. I'm trying to get rid of the green stuff, and once I have this in place, I can kind of see where the lines are going to have to route and where I'm going to have to place this T in. So first thing I'm going to start with is the fuel filter. I'll take it off, and I'm probably going to paint up the bracket. The return line is going to be taken back to the steel line back here, and the feed line coming off the filter will be split off to the two feed lines I have going to both fuel rails. And then on the return side, I'll put the regulator somewhere over here and the FMU over here, but I'll start with the filter. Okay, so I am done with what I can do up here in the front. I have the new fuel filter installed, the FMU is installed. I've got some stainless machine screws threaded in there into the shock tower. I know they're Robertson screws, but this is Canada, so that's kind of what you get. All the lines are installed except for this return line. This needs to go up onto this steel line here, and it's obviously not long enough, so I'm going to have to get some more line and put a new piece on to make it longer. And from the filter here, this line comes down, and I've put the T right next to the filler neck, and it kind of wraps around. The two lines are almost the same length. I've tried to maintain that, so this one line goes all the way over to this side on the rail here, and the other line kind of passes underneath the intake and attaches to the rail here that loops around to the front into number 2 cylinder. Then back here, the return side also needs to be teed off from both rails back into a single line so that it can go to the regulator. So that's the factory regulator off of another intake manifold, and the reason for that is the turbo sits so close to this regulator that it pretty much touches it, or the inlet for the turbo. So I've got this little insulator wrapped around here, And this regulator is actually gutted. It's completely drilled out and back in place. And so that's the reason for this remote regulator here. And then this goes up to the FMU. The FMU will bump fuel pressure even higher, and of course it gets relieved to the tank. So there's a couple vacuum lines that still need to be put on, and that one return line. That pretty much does it up here in the front. So now I'm going to move to the back, pull the lining out of the trunk, and get the fuel pump out of the tank. So I've already got the fuel pump assembly out of the tank. It looks like the pump's been already changed once before. The filter looks reusable but old. I'm not sure if this sock filter will fit on. It should though. And then the top here, it's got a little bit of rust and scale that I'm going to try and clean up a little bit. But for the most part it looks okay. Getting the return line off, it's almost necessary to have a set of these pliers without, you know, cutting the hose or tearing it. And even with the pliers, it's very difficult to start getting it loose, but as soon as it does, you can kind of start shoving it off, and that works really well. So I'm going to take off the old pump first. I've got the new replacement pump here, and these hoses that they come with, I'm not going to use. I'm going to end up reusing a piece of my high pressure Gates hose. This stuff goes to 225 psi, so it's good for my high pressure setup. And then the feed line coming out of the top here is actually a plastic line, and I think it's plastic down to the metal line underneath the car. I have to double check that. I don't want any of the weak hose left behind with weak clamps, because it will leak. With the pump out of the way, I'll go ahead and try and clean up the top of this a little bit and then get the new pump installed. So I have the pump assembly all together, new pump installed. I ended up using a little piece of hose as an insulator in the back, zip tied it there. I did get that new fuel sock on, no problem. I put the what I like to call fuel injection clamps and the new piece of high pressure hose. And the connector just pretty much connects right on, you don't have to change it. And then over here on this side, I got this top plate cleaned up as best I can, and actually I get a little piece of tape still on here, and of course painted as best I can. It's not perfect, but it's certainly going to put up with the corrosion. And then even all the little nuts, I went and wired wheeled all those, so I'll put some anti-seize in up on the threads, get this guy back installed. And one last thing is the return line coming up on here. I do want to put another one of these clamps just to get rid of the spring clamp that was on there. So I'll put this back in the tank and call it a day. So now that I have the fuel pump back in the tank and it's all buttoned up, really kind of taken care of up here in the front, other than that return line and a couple vacuum lines, the fuel system is pretty much taken care of. I should have a wideband so I can keep track of the numbers of what's coming out of the exhaust. This is a very mechanically tuned setup, and watching the wideband really lets you know what's going on with it. You can't really adjust timing because the ECU will learn around it, and the only way to adjust your fuel is to pretty much put a different FMU on there. And I have had a 12-to-1 on there before it was getting too rich down into the 11s. But before I start rambling on about that too much, if you like this video, definitely give it a thumbs up. And if you're new here and you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button for me. Leave your questions and comments further down below. And I'll see you in the next one.